Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today, this first week of January 2023. I spotted that it's also 12th night, it's the last day of Christmas, which is known as Epiphany Eve. So brace yourself, because who knows what revelations are going to come to the fore tonight for you to put into practice tomorrow. I'm Beck Evans, and I am here with my co-author, Chris Smith, to celebrate the launch of our book, Written: How to Keep Writing and Build a Habit That Lasts. And we are joined by Oliver Burkeman, recovering productivity geek, one of our favourite writers who was very kind enough to write the foreword to the book. Before I get to the introductions, I just want to say a few words about how this session is going to work. If you're watching live, it's in webinar mode. So you can ask a question using the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the screen. We're going to get to the audience questions at the end of the session, and you can upvote and comment on those. All your cameras and sound is off, which means you can listen in any way that works for you. You can be relaxed on the sofa, lying on the floor, multitasking while you're cooking or doing a workout. There's no perfect way to show up. And if you are watching this, the video on catch up, feel free to pause it now, put on an elasticated waist or draw a long bath, light a candle and soak up the wisdom of this conversation over the next hour. So that is the practical stuff covered. I'm going to hand over to Chris now.
So hello, everyone. My name's Chris. I'm co-author of Written. I'm co-founder of Prolifico. And as Beck said, today is launch day of our book, Written. So thanks so much for being here to help us celebrate our big day. So I thought I'd just spend a little bit of time just telling you what Written is all about. So Written is for anyone who has ever procrastinated over a writing project of any kind, which means it's for everyone. It helps you become more productive. It helps you find more time. It helps you overcome obstacles, things like distraction and overwhelm. And it helps you do all of this in a way that's personal to you and in a way that works for you and your life. Beck and I, if you don't know us, we are writing productivity coaches at Prolifico, and we've been working with writers and writing for decades. And really the book distills everything we've learned over the years about how to start right, how to keep going, and most importantly, how to finish your writing project. It's hopefully full of lots of stories that are really going to inspire you. It's full of research, the latest research into psychology and neuroscience and the science of habits. And it's also packed full of our own tried and tested tips. These are the kind of things that we've used over the years and we know that works in our webinars and in our coaching programs and all those kind of things. It's available from today. So it's available now in all good bookshops and Amazon. So that's the flagrant pitch over. So back to Beck.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I'm going to welcome Oliver Burkeman and any other visitors who like to appear behind him in the course of this conversation.
I'll try to stage one of those viral videos where I
crawl.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Excellent. Oliver is a writer who started his career as a journalist, becoming a columnist at the Guardian newspaper. His first book, Help: How to Become Slightly Happier and Get a Bit More Done, was based on his long-running and much-loved This Column Will Change Your Life. It was followed up by The Antidote: Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking, where he presents an alternative negative capability approach for a good life that embraces constraints, uncertainty, and even failure. His 2021 best-selling book, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, asks, what if we stop trying to do absolutely everything? And by embracing the limitations of our life, we can unlock a more meaningful path. He's been writing about psychology, philosophy, writing about writing, which is how we came across him and connected more than 10 years ago. And he has a brilliant newsletter called The Imperfectionist. And next week we'll be running his first masterclass, The Art of Imperfect Action. welcome, Oliver. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here, and this is a fantastic book. It'd be funny if I held up one of my own then, wouldn't it? This is a fantastic book. Congratulations, and I'm really happy to be able to be here with you to help celebrate the launch.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I thought, as it is the first week of January, I'd like to kick off this conversation talking about goals. We are all feeling that, new year, new you pressure for more resolutions and better versions of ourselves. And we get asked about goals a lot, and we get to, run workshops and talk to people about it. And so do you. You've written about goals. I mean, you wrote about Help. In Help, you wrote about smart goal setting and this alternative approach, which is called Ready, Fame, Aim, Fire, which you explored more deeply in The Antidote. I would just like to find out, where are you on goals at the moment?
That I've gone through sort of various stages in how I think about goal setting, because one of the things that I was doing when I was writing The Antidote was taking a very sort of skeptical view about how too much focus on goals can kind of distort what you're doing. It can drain the pleasure out of the activity. Everything just becomes done for the purposes of something later on. You're never sort of enjoying the moment, and you're all sorts of other problems as well. I think at the same time, it's kind of futile to imagine that we can sort of get by, that we can ever sort of be so completely in the moment that we are not trying to get anywhere. And like, books don't get written unless you do have a goal of writing a book and goals of writing chapters, paragraphs, one word next, And I think that the way that I've sort of settled on this for myself anyway is to think about goals as ways of navigating, right? Ways of helping you make decisions in the moment about what it is that you're going to do with this moment. So not these kind of things where you invest all the meaning of life into like the point at which you get to the end of the quest, but just ways of sort of making decisions about what to do now, when there are a million things that you could do in any moment, and you need to be able to choose one of them. The other thing that I find more and more in my life, I don't know if this is a good sign or a bad sign that I need it more and more, but is like very small goals, the kind that you can achieve in a morning or in a half hour, I think have a sort of very simple reward function that helps a lot. It helps me a lot if I can write something on a piece of paper that I'm on a list and tick it off. So that's also part of it. Bit of a rambling answer. Sorry, I was slightly thrown by my internet connection giving away, but it seems to have held now. So
thank you. We love a bit of tension to keep us on our toes. It's really interesting you talking about these kind of micro goals, because it feels a bit more like, a to-do list in some ways. I mean, have you changed how you think about that, having your master list to one side and then this kind of daily, I'm just going to do this one thing and then I will do the next thing step by step?
I mean, that's still very much my approach in my life in general and work in particular, right? Is to make sure that there are two places where I'm thinking about the tasks that are on my plate. One of them is the place where you put absolutely everything, good old-fashioned David Allen style, for those who are familiar with that productivity approach. You need some system, an app, a notebook, piece of paper, doesn't matter, where you really do just like put everything that's on your plate. And that's less to do with organizing your writing as making sure that you're not thinking about all the other things that are not your writing when you're doing it, right? That's about not worrying about, oh, do I need to call the dentist? Oh, do I need to do this or that? It's all on that list, and that you can go back there if you need to. And then the second thing is some sort of much more constrained, much more gentle list of maybe the two things it's most important to get done today, or the one writing goal that you want to meet today. And so, I think what we do a lot of the time with lists is we confuse lists as storage with lists as intention. And we think that, if you make a list of sort of 400 things that are on your plate, hopefully nobody's going to fall for the idea that they're supposed to achieve all those things in a day or a week or indeed ever. And you can really notion it all goes, and it's just
Thank you. You just froze a little bit at the end there, but don't worry, we got it. I was just going to say that I mean I do love setting goals, and I love New Year's and resolutions, and I am one of those sorts of people who likes writing down lots of those things, but I don't feel terribly attached to them. And I was just going to say that Chris, on the other hand, in all the many years I've known him, I don't know if I've ever known him ever set a goal of any type, actually.
That is true. But before you have everyone sort of has me pegged as a sort of directionless, aimless waster. I mean, that's the whole point of the book, really, in that whilst I don't personally find goals and goal setting a particularly motivating thing to do, that's not to say that other people shouldn't use that tactic, and that I couldn't use a different tactic to help me. So one of the things, for example, that I was thinking through this, one of the things that has helped me in the past is actually thinking about the things that will stop me from achieving not just necessarily a goal, but some kind of ambition. Because I do manage to get things done regardless of whether I actually set goals or not. Right. And I know, Oliver, that kind of process is something that you've thought through and written about with the work of Gabrielle Oettingen. I think I've pronounced that right. In terms of this whole process of obstacle thinking, or I think she calls it mental contrasting. And it's a very simple approach, really. It's just the whole idea is that have a goal and have something that you want to achieve, have an ambition, but make sure alongside that ambition that you also are aware of the things that may well get in the way of you achieving that ambition at the same time. It's a really simple idea, and it's actually the kind of thing that we start most of our coaching courses, and it's in the book as well. And I just didn't know whether that is something that you have incorporated into your life or into your writing, that kind of obstacle thinking approach.
To a limited extent, that does come up sometimes on sort of bigger, more complicated projects. I think it's really useful to sort of ask yourself those questions. I'm going to be honest with you and say in order to demonstrate the wide variety of approaches, and say that I don't think I do that on a sort of a day-to-day basis. For me, the real, I mean, this is maybe a different question and a different topic, so we can turn to it later or not. But for me, the big challenge that I'm always facing is the balance between sort of structure and freedom, and the fact that if I come any kind of plan that I come up with for my day or for my writing over a course of weeks and months is prone to this phenomenon where I immediately rebel against it, because it's like I don't want to be told what to do by some jerk, even if that jerk is me. And so there is this subtle phenomenon where you have to find a balance between sort of making things happen and letting them happen. I'm also not someone who can just sit there, meander through life aimlessly and hope that inspiration is going to strike at the right moment and suddenly translate into thousands of words. So it's that holding a degree of structure in what I'm planning to do, without it becoming sort of oppressive and something that I want to rebel against. That's sort of for me, it's the key challenge. I don't know if that relates exactly to what you were saying, but it's where it is for me.
Well, I mean, one thing I find with that kind of obstacle thinking approach is like just on a daily basis, I can figure out what is going to distract me, and that level of like freedom and fighting against what I want to do, because fundamentally we're human, we like procrastinating. It's like it's more fun than doing the work or doing the writing, and it's quite hard to figure out are you actually procrastinating? Do you need freedom? Because we do need that as writers, to be able to have ideas, find ideas, but sometimes we just want to be a bit lazy and do something easier.
Yeah, right. And it's such a subtle balance between like not giving into your worst impulses versus not being just relentlessly and pointlessly hard on yourself, which I think is definitely, looking back at my life, I've definitely been more on the side of sort of unnecessary meanness to myself than the other. So I think it's we're so familiar with the risk of just doing something silly and fun when we ought to be doing something challenging and accomplished that it's very sort of, I think you have to keep in the back of your mind the idea that like sort of relentless barking at yourself to do things is not going to be the answer to anything. And that, like, I mean, just at the most fundamental level, I think there's something really powerful about remembering that, like, you don't need to do any of this, right? I mean, especially when it comes to writing creativity, you may need to in a certain sense of nourishing your soul. And but you know, maybe there are a few things we need to do with food and shelter in life, but it's really important, I think, in the back of your mind to remember that, like, you know, you don't need to do this to sort of save your life. And to me, that's actually causes me to want to do it more, right? That's actually a productivity tip. It's not, it does not, as people sometimes fear, or certainly with me anyway, does not lead me to sort of say, well, why bother then, and not do anything. It's like the stakes can easily be too high for things like writing, and lowering them can be incredibly powerful, because then you're just doing it for the fun of it, instead of because you've decided on some level that you're only sort of worthy somehow if you complete the project you've launched.
And how did that unnecessary meanness to yourself, what did you do?
I mean, the most obvious form of that, and I think I see it in a lot of other people too, is just incredibly rigorous, detailed, ambitious plans about when you're going to do what through the day. For some people, this kind of time boxing, I think, can be really useful, but for a certain kind of person, it's so easily misused. It so becomes this kind of like, okay, these are my marching orders for the day, and I'm going to do this until then, this until then. Within this section, I'm going to achieve all this. And of course, the moment that that doesn't work out, because we are, you know, not to be pretentious about it, we are channeling our unconsciousnesses in this work, and you're in a relationship with something weird and unknown when you're writing. It's you know, any kind of writing. So you don't actually get to dictate things like, I'm going to have you know, completed this section by this time. On the other hand, if you don't make any move in that direction of sort of, you know, I'd really like to get a certain amount of progress during this session, then you're liable to still be on page one after a year. So it's so I think for me, it's that kind of rigorous planning of a kind that then just sets yourself up for failure and leaves you sort of annoyed with yourself and the world, and unluckily probably other people in your orbit as well.
Yeah, I always remember you quoted G.K. Chesterton, which I think is a brilliant quote. If something is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. And I really like that as a way of kind of lowering the stakes, because, you know, if you're gonna, you know, you've got to do it. You might set yourself this really big, ambitious goal, but actually you just have to start. And I think you write about how when we procrastinate, it's actually still giving us control of a project, because it's still this perfect plan, you know, this, we haven't even started on it yet, and that we delay starting because it is going to be, you know, not as good as our dreams and our, you know, our visions are.
Absolutely. I was really influenced, and I quoted him my 4,000 Weeks. So sorry if there are people who read that and this is repetitious, but there was a piece that a philosopher called Kostika Bradatan wrote in the New York Times a few years ago now, where he tells this story about an architect who designed the perfect mosque and then refused to actually let it be built because anything that was built in reality would inevitably fall short of his perfect fantasies. And he's sort of, Bradatan in this piece is sort of comparing this to Gnostic theology. It gets very sort of complicated and involved, but the basic idea is that there is a sense in which bringing anything into the world is to degrade it, right? It's to sort of settle for less than the fantasy. And I think it's so useful to realize that this is built in, because then it means, you know, when your writing does not measure up to your perfect fantasy, you realize it's not because you screwed up or because you're not as good as other people. It's like it's built into the situation that if perfection is what you're going for, you've already failed. And I always think that idea that you've already failed, as opposed to that you might fail, it's so empowering, because it's like, oh great, like, don't need to worry about that now. I can just do the best that I can do with the materials that I have to hand. So I think it's really, it's good to get it's good to get familiar with the degree to which sort of perfectionistic fantasies can drive some people. I was going to say us, but maybe I'm screwed up in a specific way. I don't know.
I'm going to I think we should talk about time, actually, because it came up then. You mentioned about scheduling and how that's an approach that works for you. And it's generally the thing that people come to us and they say they don't have the time to write. They want more time, or they want to make better use of the time they have, optimize it. And your book 4,000 Weeks, you open it by saying that the brevity of life is the defining problem of human existence, and that fundamentally productivity is a trap. The time management approaches that we have, they're just failing us. And accepting that, admitting defeat is really excellent news, and that by abandoning hope, it leads not to despair but to motivation. And that's the kind of liberating concept behind your book. And you say, once we realize that, we can roll up our sleeves and start work on what is gloriously possible instead. Can you tell us a bit about this concept of embracing our limitations and the limited time we have?
Sure. And then I'd love to know how you think it ties in or doesn't with the work that you do in the context of writing specifically. I mean, in a way, there's just a certain kind of move that I realize I'm now making sort of all the topics that I touch, and time is no exception, which is basically that, it's worse than you think. You think that your situation is that you've got so much to do, it's going to be incredibly hard to get it done. But no, it's actually going to be impossible to get it all done. You think your situation is that you're going to have to struggle to make your book perfect. But in fact, it's impossible to make your book perfect. It's worse than you think. And there's that move from things are difficult and bad, and I've got a chance, if I really, really exert a lot of anxiety and anguish, I've got a chance of conquering them, to the realization that no, that's worse than that. We're so far from going to be capable to get our arms around everything there is to do, make use of every single moment of time, live forever, all these goals that we might on some secret level have. But there's actually, again, huge liberation in that. And in the context of time, that is just in seeing that there will always be too much to do. There will always be more meaningful things you could do with your time than you will have time in which to do them. And one of the ways that helps is it makes you see that, if you want to make time for writing in your life, something else, and then if you think about it in a certain way, millions of other things are going to have to give, right? There isn't a clever way to avoid that. And on the one hand, that's kind of depressing, because it means okay, what do you want to give up in order to have an hour a day to work on your creative project? But in another sense, I think it's liberating and consoling, because it says, nobody else is going to find a way to do this. It's built into the situation. We're only deciding what to neglect in life. We're not trying to find a way to not neglect anything. And to me, that's just okay, that's lovely. And that has the effect of making me see that there are, 4 or 5 things in life that really, really, really matter to me. And then a whole bunch of other things that are totally important and meaningful. And I don't have to convince myself that they're worthless. It's just that there isn't going to be time for them. Anyway, yes, that's the basic idea. So tell me how that relates to actually getting writing done in the day, please.
I will. But I was just going to say very quickly that I think prioritization is something that everyone struggles with, and that people have these kind of methods and systems, whether it's the Eisenhower matrix or things like that. And then I don't find them particularly helpful. But I just like you saying then that, we're deciding what to neglect rather than deciding, what and I think it's quite a nice way to flip that kind of that choice of how we spend our time. It's well, these things just aren't important, and then you're left with fewer things to focus on.
Right, or even just to butt in, I'm afraid even a lot of things that are important are not going to make the cut, right? And that was a big revelation for me, that realization. And there's a wonderful Elizabeth Gilbert quotation that sums this up. But learning to say no to things, this thing we hear about in every magazine article every day, is it entails having to say no to things that are perfectly legitimate, good claims on your time. It does not just involve saying no to rubbish. It means saying no to things that there's just that built-in poignancy. It's to do these things, I have to not do those things, and those things would be really cool too.
Yeah, that Elizabeth Gilbert quote is amazing, because she says, it's easy, it's hard saying no, but it's easier saying no to things you don't want to do. It's when you have to say no to all the things you really want to do that it gets hard. And that's when, that we are fundamentally forced to do if we want to make time for writing in our life. But that sort of led me to, when I was researching this, that is it the Edward Friedkin, the Friedkin paradox, that if two things are equally good to do.
Yeah.
It basically, what is it? The more equally attractive two alternatives seem, the harder it is to choose between them. But no matter what, the choice only matters less, because actually it doesn't really matter which one you choose to do.
Right. Yes. And just to sort of rephrase that back at you for no reason except that it's the way that makes sense to me. The idea, one way of thinking about this is like, if you've got 3 hours of discretionary time and there are two things you could do with it, and they both seem really, really important, what we tend to do then is agonize about which of those two things to do. But logic, if you can adopt a slightly more rational mindset logic dictates that actually it matters. You might as well toss a coin, because they're both going to be really meaningful uses of your time. It's actually less of a, it ought to be, rationally speaking, less of a problem.
But going back to some of the themes in 4,000 Weeks, in terms of how we use time and how we conceive of time in terms of something that we have and we can possess. As coaches, what's interesting that we have people coming to us saying that they have absolutely no time, so they have no time to do any writing, so they just don't. Then some other people come to us and say, I've got so much time for writing, and they still don't do any writing. So it's not the time itself, it's the prioritization. It's all these other things that get in the way. It's not time itself that stops people writing, even though they may well think it is.
Yeah, no, and I've really had to sort of contend with this in my own sort of work as well, because part of what I've been arguing in my last book is that we have to make these tough choices, and lots of things we can't do because we don't have the time to do them. But then I'm forced to acknowledge that there are all sorts of things that I don't do in my life when I kind of do have the time to do them, really. And it's a question of asking what else is going on there. And I think there's a lot of truth in that notion. It can be said in a way that sounds very cruel, I think, but there's a lot of truth in that notion that, like, well, no, it's not that you don't have time, it's that you chose not to use your time for that purpose. Now, that's a hard thing to say to someone who feels like run ragged by the attempt to sort of, look after family and pay the rent and everything. But it's true in a specific sense, which is like, yeah, you're making a choice. If you decide not to spend any time writing, you're making a choice. And it might be the right choice for this week or month or year. It's not always wrong to put these things to one side, depending on the situation that you're in.
Yeah. And I think, you asked about like, how do we use time? And we found working with writers, we've been doing research over the years, and we ended up with about 3,500 writers who'd responded to surveys, and that enabled us to come up with different patterns for how people use their time. And I think a lot of what we try to do with the book is we present the research, and we present stories of different writers and how they do things. And the purpose of us doing that is not to show that this is the best way to do it or the only way to do it, but it's so people can, take a bit of inspiration. And in the chapter, it's the first big chapter of the book is time, because that's the problem people seem to face. So it was really important it came first. And we just talk about 4 different approaches, which, we've started to cover already. There's the scheduling, what we call time boxing. So that is putting time in your calendar, might be 2 or 3 times a week, treating it like any other appointment. It's prioritized, it's in the calendar, it's time boxed. There is what's often considered that golden standard for productivity, which is daily, which is that more habitual, same time, same place, no kind of willpower, just showing up. And we do find that it is quite good for people, but actually it makes more people feel really bad because they can't do it. But it really, the people who can do daily writing, they really weather the ups and downs of writing, because if they don't write, they can show up the next day and they'll try again. And then for the people who are really, really time pressed, we have a spontaneous, which I think other writers often call sort of the snacking approach, or it's using time confetti, which is just grabbing little moments where they come. And, you know, that's for people whose lives are really unpredictable or completely overbooked. So it might be that really small little moments of time.
Yeah.
And the fourth one is the binge writing approach, which I know, Oliver, you have some fear of these multi-day binges.
Yeah.
But it's, you were just saying that, you know, if you can't write for days or weeks, you know, accept you can't write. And just say, right, I will do it in, you know, whatever, a month's time, and schedule it and treat that binge in an intentional way, rather than this panicked, hypermanic way that kind of Robert Boyce writes about.
Right. Right. Yes, it's interesting. The most challenging part of this book of yours, I think, is being asked to consider that there might be a role for binge writing. I feel like we should call it sprint writing or something, right? We should
rebrand it.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Rebrand it.
Right. We should break the sort of vague echo of eating disorders, I think, in this thing. Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you're sort of the dream here, of course, is to be sufficiently knowledgeable about yourself, perhaps through working through a book like this, absolutely, and sufficiently sort of nimble about how you change from day to day. I mean, that's something I definitely still struggle with. It's like, if a day shapes up, I'm very much that kind of a few hours daily in the morning kind of person. Try to do that pretty much every day. Be kind to yourself. It doesn't work every day, but the basic expectation is every day. And the thing I find really challenging is, like, if that doesn't work because either of events in my life, or, you know, kid being sick, or just for sort of weird motivational psychological reasons, which can happen, adjusting to still do a little bit that day, or just feel good about not doing it or something, as opposed to just like calling off the whole day because my plan for it didn't come good. That's a key challenge. That is still challenging.
I think why we find that those four categories work quite well for people, and again in the coaching and with the book, is largely because a lot of time, I'm not talking about you here, but people become quite wedded to using time in a certain way and using a certain approach, and even if they know that there are these different approaches that they could use, and the one that they are using may not be right for them, it can be quite liberating just knowing that there are different approaches out there.
Totally. Yeah, it's important to be able to experiment a little bit, because I think, I'm sure something else that happens is, and I think I've been there, I think I'm loosened up on this now, but something worked just about for you, and it's not very pleasant, but it just about works in terms of output. You really don't want to mess with that, and sort of allow yourself to do something different, because, hey, you know, at least I meet my deadlines if you're a journalist, or at least I, you know, get the words out. And it's important to be able to let yourself sort of say, well, okay, just for a day, just for the next couple of days, I'm going to see what happens if I try this alternative approach.
Yeah, and I think we've found that we can become wedded to approach, and we compare ourselves to that. So writers are notorious for comparing ourselves with other writers, you know, more famous and successful ones, and our peers. But also we compare ourselves to like a past version of ourselves where a certain approach worked. So for example, if you're looking at academics, a PhD, who that was their main priority, write PhD for several years, it's much harder when they are on a tenure track and they have, you know, a full-time job and a family and all the other responsibilities. That doesn't work, and that can lead to blocks where they make that comparison, but then they're also many of us make comparisons to this future ideal version of ourselves, and that can be just as toxic as comparing ourselves to others and to past versions of ourselves. And I was just going to say that I've got, carry on.
No, it's extraordinary how many different comparators we will find that all have the effect of making us miserable, when I think the only legitimate comparison really can be like, you know, I could have stayed in bed and done absolutely nothing today, which, by the way, even that is probably fine in moderation. But like, the comparison for what you did today should be compared to had you done nothing, not compared to whether you'd met some sort of past or future fantasy goal, I think.
Yeah. Oh, it's back to goals and those ideal versions of planning again. And I was just going to say that I've got some questions. I mean, we've got questions coming in on the Q&A, and I've got some from some other writers who've sent them in advance. And Molly Flatt, she's a novelist who's also a writer as her day job, and she was sort of wondering whether you can reach your full potential without an ideal focused routine. She sort of wonders whether she could have been a much better writer if she could write for 5 hours each morning, then read, reflect, walk in the afternoon, which is that kind of theoretical ideal routine. But it's absolutely impossible because of juggling work and childcare. And that sort of leads to that. It's almost like that worry or that regret that she couldn't be the writer she wants to be. I think that's quite a common feeling amongst many of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know. I think for me, it really gets at that. I don't want this to sound glib, but it really gets at that idea that kind of disappointment or some kind of failure is sort of, it's sort of built into the situation. It's like, it's not that there was a way of doing this that wouldn't have resulted in some kind of poignancy or sadness at missing out on something. That is only an impression you'll get if you watch sort of YouTube productivity videos made entirely by like 23-year-old men. Yeah, no, it is. If you've got no kids and there are other complications in life, you do have a certain ability to just do the things you wanted to do, but then you're missing out on things that you don't even know about. So I don't think it's a particularly helpful thing to say in response to that question, except maybe it's the only truly helpful thing there is, which is like, yeah, I think that's a fair feeling to have. I don't think you should struggle to try to eliminate that sense of poignancy in lives not lived, because actually it's in opening to that truth about being limited like we are that you'll realize in a deep way, how meaningful the path you did take has been. So I don't think that's I don't think that's an illegitimate feeling or something one should aspire to never feel. And the perfect routine, of course, doesn't exist. The perfect routine is one of these kind of fantasies that we're holding ourselves to. I have amazing routines for my day in my head, but if you look really closely at them, they sort of add up to more than 24 hours or involve me never feeling a bit sleepy at 2:30 in the afternoon or something like that. So yeah, so what?
Yeah, it's just come up in the, I was just having a quick look at the Q&A, and we've got some really great questions coming in just about it's Laura Bennett's asked about, she'd read 4,000 Weeks while she was writing a PhD, and she just had twins in the middle of all of that, and she was just wondering how. And I think it comes up a lot with, if you say 23-year-old men on YouTube giving productivity advice, this issue around, childcare and how you've found things have changed for you, because it comes up a lot, actually.
Yeah,
big life changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in the case of 4,000 Weeks, it's kind of ridiculous because I actually sold the book proposal about 8 months before we knew that our son, my first and only child, was due to be coming along. I then had to negotiate multiple extensions with the publisher because nothing happened in my writing life outside of just, I was doing a lot of freelance journalism then, so that sort of got forced the pace by deadlines and income. But the book did not get written, and I'm conscious that probably be more significant in effect still if I was his mother rather than his father, and yet what it was doing was sort of confirming and helping me deepen my understanding of the very thesis that I was trying to outline in the book, which is, one thing that children will do. I don't think it doesn't fundamentally change the fact that we're all finite. That applies just as much to people who are not parents, but it makes certain truths that are true for all of us much harder to ignore. And one of those is, having sort of 2/3 at least of your previous discretionary time in your life just completely eliminated. It will make that sense of like trade-off and the fact that to do one thing you have to not be doing something else incredibly vivid, in a way that is occasionally frustrating, but a lot of the time is so unavoidable if you want to be a halfway decent, halfway present parent and you have a job and not a private income or something. It's so unavoidable that there's a certain sense in which it is less stressful, because it is, it's incredibly stressful to be up multiple times a night with a newborn baby and things like that. But it's not that. There's a sense in which I ended up using it to cut myself a little bit of slack, because clearly the possibility of doing every single thing that popped into my head, which was never on the cards beforehand, was so much more obviously not on the cards, that actually you just sort of have to do what's in front of you. Now, that's not a useful tip about how to fit writing in around childcare. That's like an existential refocusing. You, I suspect, have some tips from your coaching work about that kind of question, and I'm sure it goes in the direction of the sort of using time confetti. I don't want to say write while the baby naps. That seems like it would get me repeatedly stabbed by anyone I suggested it to. But certainly an ability to do something on your creative work for 25 minutes instead of needing 5 hours is going to be an incredible benefit in that kind of situation.
It's interesting that at that period in your life, you were almost so overwhelmed that it actually helped you become a lot more zen and actually practice acceptance of the time you actually had, because you didn't have any time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's, it's the same thing I just bang on about. It's like, it's even more, the situation of our finite time is even more total than we like to think. And there's something in that is like, all right, then.
Yeah.
Change the nappy that's in front of me.
Yeah. And it's what's really important about that is that you, or all of us, all writers, figure that out for ourselves. We have to notice that about ourselves. And a lot of our book, we are really inspired by Professor Ellen Langer from Harvard, and she writes about mindfulness, which is just kind of basically noticing self. It's an element of self-reflection. She's absolutely excellent. And I'll just read out the quote, because it comes up again when we think about productivity gurus or comparing ourselves to other writers and anybody who doles out advice. And it's just, the rules you were given were the rules that worked for the person who created them. And the more different you are from that person, the worse they're going to work for you. When you're mindful, rules, routines, and goals guide you. They don't govern you. And I find that so powerful, because it just takes into account that, of course, Professor Robert Boyce, who's quoted a lot, and he's got a lot to offer writing productivity, but, he's coming from a very certain perspective, and that if you just compare yourself to his advice, you will feel bad or you'll fall short. So you've got to see, like, how am I different from this person? What does it mean to be able to figure out that in my own life?
I think sorry, I was just going to say, I think that really goes to the heart of, well, it is the book, and also our coaching more generally, which is this whole concept of productivity is personal. And if there's kind of one single thread that runs through the book, it's that, in the idea that there is no one tactic that is going to work for everyone. And what we do, and what the book does, is try to help people to find those combinations of tactics and approaches and so forth that work for you. And what the Langer work does in terms of mindfulness, I kind of think of it as almost like being like the key that helps you to find those things that work for you. Because if you don't notice what works, and if you don't notice what doesn't work for you, then you're never going to be able to, or you'll struggle to find the things that work, and you'll struggle to find these tactics and approaches that help.
I think, yeah, I agree completely. And there's a point to sort of augment that I can't remember if it comes from written. So I'm either giving you a point of your own back at you or I'm not, but which is that obviously those routines that we hear about, when you read the Paris Review interviews with the famous authors about how they work for precisely 3.5 hours each morning or whatever, like, not only is this personality specific, but also they will have been emergent in the lives of those writers. There will have been things that through trial and error they found worked for them. So the process of coming up with them was also not this kind of like, here's routine, now I will implement it onto myself. And one of the so in a way, one of the things that you need to bring mindfulness to, I guess, is watching in your own life what seems to be working and sort of going more in that direction. And just to hark back to an earlier point for me, that one of those things has been like, actually, when I drive myself a bit less relentlessly and I'm a little bit kinder to myself and I pursue and enjoy this, and I sort of think about trying to make the day enjoyable, I've noticed that actually it's better for my productivity and my output. It's not actually in tension with it. So that kind of noticing of what's emerging in my life as a good routine for me is actually a really useful skill. It's fine to be inspired by what Haruki Murakami does, just to pick the most sort of exhausting example even just to think about. But like, he found that it works for him and for his writing, and so the question is to follow his example is to ask what works for you and for your writing.
Yeah, and it really is about, rather than comparing ourselves to other writers, taking inspiration from them. And you mentioned the Paris Review, the kind of long form interviews. I really like Mason Curry's Daily Rituals, particularly his second book. So he did the first book and then he realized that it mainly focused on men. So he brought out a companion volume that just focused on women, again, with a much more different types of lives. They're artists and creators of all types. And, the idea is that, do find out what other writers are doing, because community, you really do learn a lot from other writers. And I do encourage people to join writing groups and join writers' hours and things like that. But don't use it as a way to beat yourself up. Use it as a point of inspiration and then run those experiments. If you're not sure what is working for you at the moment, run those low stakes, quick experiments just to figure things out, because it really is. We don't know what's going to work until we try it.
Right. And don't expect the same thing to work for you every day, and don't expect the same thing to work for you forever. That's the other thing. I spent a very long part of my early adulthood, I think, thinking that that my interest in productivity and habits and psychology was going to eventually lead to some time where I had like figured it all out, and then you're just going to follow that routine to the end of your life. Well, yeah. It's not going to happen, and it would actually be no fun anyway. So I think just allowing for the idea that, if you're at an event like this, or you're reading a book like the one you've written, like, you're going to be the kind of person who nerds out a little bit on all this stuff, and that's totally fine. It shouldn't be something where like you're sort of subtly thinking that because you haven't found the exact right routine yet, that's a problem. It's like this question of exactly how to tinker with and arrange my writing habits, I'm quite sure will be with me until the day I stop writing. So yeah.
I really like the idea that, writing advice is advice. And even if those people that are giving you the advice are your PhD supervisor or your university or the revered Dr. Robert Boyce, it is just advice.
Yeah.
And it needs to work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes what it is the givers of the advice telling you how they wish they had done things, or what they were capable of, or trying to rationalize choices they've made in their lives. And in my own writing about advice, I feel like the only thing I do try to do is be honest about that fact. I don't think it's not a reason not to give advice. But yeah, the idea that someone giving advice has got it all figured out is never going to be the case. Yeah.
No, Not at all, not at all. Just thinking about advice, I'm really aware of time. It's rushing past, and I have been trying to filter our conversation to reflect some of the questions in the Q&A. So I'm hoping I'm trying to cover some of those. But is there any advice that you have taken that really hasn't worked for you in the past? I mean, have you run experiments that have failed miserably and you have gladly accepted that and moved on?
It's a really interesting question. I'm not sure gladly accepted, but I mean, one of the things that springs to mind is that I think I have sort of finally accepted that time boxing is not for me. But that sort of approach where you mark out onto a calendar the hours in the day that you're going to be doing one thing, and then when you're going to stop and move on to the next thing, that is a step too far in terms of making me feel like I'm sort of imprisoned by the plan I've made. Clearly, it's incredibly effective for lots of people. So that's a good example of a piece of advice that is not, it's not like it's wrong. It's just one that I've had to give up on. Another place where I feel like I've sort of accepted something about myself in the direction of sort of accepting some perfectionistic or neurotic tendencies, I suppose, is that I am extremely bad at doing kind of just vomit it out kind of first drafts. I'm not someone who finds it easy to be like, just do it any old way first and then try to get the sentences right. I remember years ago now when I was at the Guardian, and when he was at the Guardian as well, my then colleague Gary Young, brilliant writer and columnist, sharing with me, I think it was an insight he'd just come to recently in his own writing back then, decades ago, that you could just, that if you knew sort of in a long article, if you couldn't figure out how to begin it, but you knew some way that you wanted it to go sort of halfway through, you could just begin halfway through and then work back. And I was just like, no, I can't, like never. This is just to the depths of my soul, I cannot do that. And it might be very healthy if I could, and he could, and that was great. But so that's an example of another sort of piece of advice that, again, it's not wrong, it's just not me.
Yeah. No, definitely. And what's working for you now? Is there anything that you're really enjoying about your writing?
Yeah, what is working for me now? Two things that come immediately to mind. One is to sort of try to have one single, moderately ambitious but very achievable goal per day. So I do still tend to do a few hours in the morning. That is my rhythm. And to have one idea, like that I will finish an email newsletter, that I will work out the structure of some piece I'm writing or event I'm doing or something, that I will complete the research for a given section of a chapter, something like that. To have that sort of single discrete goal, and to be willing to make all the other potential goals for that day wait until I've done that one. I mean, that works well for me. That sense of like, okay, I need to have some little victory today. So whatever that is what it is the way to keep going. The other thing which has just helped me, I've always done, it's so second nature to me that I forget that it's incredibly odd, and I just offer it in case anyone wants it. Although I think it does occur in one of those Paris Review interviews, is that when I'm sort of redrafting things, I work at the level usually either of an article or an email newsletter, or at the level of a chapter subsection. So I tend to work in these sort of like 1,000-word chunks to sort of edit and draft and redraft, is literally to print things out and type them back in. This is like such a central part of my writing routine that, as I say, I forget how odd it can strike other people. So I write a draft, I'll then print that draft out and literally copy it from the paper back into the computer. And what happens then is that all sorts of improvements and edits get made without me realizing that I'm making them. And so it's much lower effort than, for me, than sort of just it all on the screen and trying to figure out what changes need to be made.
Oh, I absolutely love those. And I was just going to pick up on, particularly in the first one. I'm going to try the second one because that sounds really intriguing. So I'm definitely going to give that one a go. But the first one you mentioned, which is picking one thing for the day. And it was a tip from Jake Knapp in his Make Time book. And he called it a highlight. And I like it. It's better than having a most important thing, which is from Zen Habits. A highlight is the thing that makes you feel like you've had a good day. You know, that sense that you feel you've had, you know, we all have this internal gauge of what productivity means, and there's something that's quite satisfying. So he focuses on your highlight for the day, which could be your most important thing. It is like send email out, send newsletter out, but it could just be sit down and have dinner with my kids tonight. So your highlight can encompass all areas of your life. And it also reminds me of Grace Marshall, who wrote How to Be Really Productive and the brilliant book Struggle. And she just calls it your to-do. So you write down, it's like your done list. You know, I've done this. So put that on your list at the end of the day, or celebrate what you have done. And I find this a really powerful, it's a lot in positive psychology, but the gratitude, the noticing what you've done, the seeing your progress can make such a difference, particularly when you're working on a very long project, like a book, where it's endless. So you need to mark up, you know, what has worked each day. I sat down, I paid attention for 15 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just a question of finding something that you're willing to do and that you think you can do. And if it's not 1,000 words, but it's 200 words, then like the difference between those two is so much smaller than the difference between doing something and doing nothing. Absolutely. Cut yourself some slack.
Brilliant. Yes. Yeah. No, we will. We change best by feeling good, you know, fundamentally. That's BJ Fogg always says that. We're out of time. It's just coming up to 7. So thank you everybody for your time and attention and your brilliant questions. There's so many amazing questions in there. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to download them, and I'll come up with a list of them and answer them in a blog or something like that, because I know you've all listened really attentively and commented on each other, and there's some great stuff there. It really means a lot that you showed up to celebrate our book launch. So thank you from me, Beck Evans, from Chris Smith, and thank you to the wonderful Oliver Burkeman. Today is the publication of Written, How to Keep Writing and Build a Habit That Lasts. It's available in all good bookshops, and there we go. Thank you.
That's the advanced copy. You got a lovely hardback if you buy it.
Oh.
Yeah, lovely hardback. Thank you. Thank you to my glamorous assistants. Available in all good bookshops, and we do encourage you to buy from local and indie where you can. You can also buy all of Oliver's 3 books. They're available. That's Help, The Antidote, and the really brilliant and life-changing 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. You can find me and Chris online at Prolifico. That's PROLIFIKO.com. And we've got lots on our website, newsletters, courses, coaching, and we're on the socials at Be Prolifico. And I am on Twitter and Instagram at Eva_Beck. You can find everything about Oliver on his website, which again, very memorable, easy to spell, unlike ours, which is oliverburkeman.com. I really encourage you to sign up to his Imperfectionist newsletter. It's just full of insights and wisdom. And it will make you feel calm and relaxed and much more accepting about the things that we can't do. And he's got his winter masterclass next weekend, The Art of Imperfect Action. I think that's everything. You all know the drill. If you like what we've said, rate, review, subscribe. It helps others find us, that kind of thing. And I'm just going to say that remember that something is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. So please go and write, go and create, make, do your hobbies imperfectly, because the only way to get something done is to just do it. I think that's everything. So thank you all very, very much. And this will be recorded, and I will send the link out to everybody who signed up. So whether you're here now, you can get to rewatch and learn from this, and I'll send out for people who couldn't make it this evening as well. So thank you all very much and have a lovely evening.